In breaking news, you can now add Erik Siebert to the long list of Department of Justice senior officials that refuse to take commands from Donald Trump to go after his political enemies and to frame his political enemies by conjuring up false criminal charges. Erik Siebert, formerly, as of today, of the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of Virginia, one of the most prestigious U.S. Attorney's Office in America, or it had been, refused to come up with mortgage fraud charges that don't exist in violation of the Department of Justice manual, in violation of the principles of federal prosecution, against his ethics, against his professional duties of responsibility, of candor to the tribunal, against Leticia James, the New York Attorney General, Donald Trump's arch enemy in his own mind, because she successfully brought fraud charges against him and his family in New York. And Donald Trump's never let her forget it. And now Siebert joins the list. Eastern District of Tennessee prosecutor who resigns because he's not going to bring phony charges against Armando Abrego Garcia for Donald Trump. We have Miss Sassoon, the acting U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York, who resigned because she refused to dismiss the charges and indictment against a corrupt Mayor Adams because she was directed to do so by the Department of Justice because they struck a deal with Adams. And now we have Erik Siebert, who's, talk about a Boy Scout, started out as a metropolitan D.C. cop, worked his way, his only job he's ever known in law enforcement or in law is in the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of Virginia. He was sponsored by both senators in Virginia. He just got the job in May. He has an outstanding, stellar, unimpeachable career. But he stood up against Donald Trump and he said, I can't find mortgage fraud for some purchase of Leticia James in Virginia, so fire me. And he got fired. But that's a badge of honor. That is a profile in courage that we're going to cover right here on MeidasTouch and Legal AF. I'm Michael Popok. Welcome. Erik Siebert was an extraordinary prosecutor with a body of work other prosecutors would envy. We are now a less safe nation again, as Donald Trump takes out leaders who are responsible for terrorism prosecution. The Eastern District of Virginia, although maybe little known outside the legal world, in my world, it's known as the Rocket Docket because the judges move their cases there so quickly. It's known as a place of preeminent excellence where some of the most important cases in America are tried, including anti-terrorism cases, espionage cases, end up in the Eastern District with that prosecutor's office on the other side, led from May until now by Erik Siebert. And we are now less safe because Erik Siebert's looking for a new job. Hopefully he'll end up at one of the public interest groups or law firms that's now taking on all cases against people, in favor of targets of Donald Trump to fire back against him. May I recommend, Mr. Siebert, you look into the American Civil Liberties Union. You look into Democracy Forward. You look into a bunch of other law firms, including Abby Lowell's law firm, who are fighting hard against the Trump administration's corruption. And for those Department of Justice attorneys that are left after 10 months, you are now complicit in the most corrupt Department of Justice in history. And if you stay, I'm sorry that you loved your job and you're trying to be a prosecutor, but you can't be a prosecutor. You can't follow the Department of Justice manual. No one does in the Department of Justice, from Pam Bondi to Alina Habba to Todd Blanche. If you can't conduct yourself in a way that's ethical, that's professional, that complies with what the oath that you and I took, the one as a federal court officer, an officer of the court, not to lie, not to bring false charges against somebody, then you need to leave. You need to follow Erik Siebert out the door. And if you stay, like the Drew Ensons of the world, the Yakov Roths of the world, the Alina Habbas of the world, birds of a feather. And if you're going to stay, that means you are complicit and you are enabling the worst and most corrupt Department of Justice of all time. There's no other way to put it. What was the thing that Erik Siebert refused to do? Donald Trump wants Leticia James' head on a spike, on a pike, because of purported mortgage fraud. She was accused of it. This is all a racket. This is all a frame job. Donald Trump instructs his attack dog, Bill Pulte, the Nepo baby, 40-year-old, beneficiary of the Pulte family fortune, who bought his way onto a position to be the head of the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac mortgage liquidity entities. From that perch, he then issues nasty social media tweets against Senator Adam Schiff and Leticia James and Lisa Cook of the Federal Reserve, claiming that they committed mortgage fraud. Nothing of the kind, because they checked two boxes during an application process, claiming that they were both two properties where they're both their primary residence. Except, first of all, not only does everybody do that, including 4 members of Donald Trump's cabinet, more than 20% of his cabinet, starting with the Treasury Secretary. Bill Pulte's own parents did it and committed property tax fraud to boot. But Leticia James isn't guilty of mortgage fraud, nor is she guilty of criminal mortgage fraud. Turns out, as everybody knows, the Attorney General for New York lives in New York. She operates out of an office in Albany, an office in New York, and some other regional offices around New York. She bought another piece of property, I think for her father, or as an investment in Virginia. A niece had a power of attorney and did the closing. Somewhere along the way, some box got checked about making it her primary residence. But we now know that the lender did not give her a primary residence loan. She did not fill out that form, and she certainly didn't have what's called mens rea, the criminal mind, to commit mortgage fraud. And that's why Erik Siebert took a look at it closely. Career prosecutor, award-winning prosecutor, one who sits at the intersection of drug enforcement, espionage, and terrorism cases. And she said, I got a piece of paper with a niece's signature on it, and a bank that didn't even rely on that to make the loan, and no other indicia of criminal fraud. I can't bring this case. In order for a prosecutor under the Department of Justice manual, which of course Pam Bondi ignores as the Attorney General, as does Trump, you must have probable cause to believe that you can sustain a conviction. And if you can't, based on the evidence in front of you, you cannot bring that case. Now, what's going to happen, and the gift that has been given now from Donald Trump, there's so many gifts. The overplaying his hand with the firing of Jimmy Kimmel only a week after Charlie Kirk was murdered or killed. Overplaying his hand there. We'll talk about that on separate hot takes. Overplaying his hand here in going after Leticia James for mortgage fraud. That creates a defense that's called vindictive prosecution. It is a grounds to dismiss an indictment because of the prosecutorial abuse. And that's all we're watching are badges of prosecutorial misconduct and vindictive prosecution, giving Leticia James the ability to have her indictment dismissed and the government sanctioned. Adam Schiff, the senator, Lisa Cook, the governor of the Federal Reserve, everybody, all the Democrats that Donald Trump is trying to use his Department of Justice to go after, have a vindictive prosecution defense handed to them by Donald Trump's own actions. Let's get Erik Siebert to testify at the Leticia James indictment hearing, motion to dismiss hearing. That ought to be fun. And he's entered the hallowed halls of those in the Department of Justice who have honor. Right? Like Miss Sassoon in New York, who said, I'm not dismissing the Eric Adams indictment. I want to supersede it and bring more charges for bribery and corruption. And when Emil Bovee, who then was in the Department of Justice and Donald Trump's favorite former criminal defense lawyer, and now on the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, ordered her to do it, she quit, wrote an 8-page letter calling out the ethics of Emil Bovee. And when the Eastern District of Tennessee prosecutor, U.S. attorney, was ordered and instructed, much like Siebert, to bring charges against Abrego Garcia, to give the Trump administration a phony cover story, to bring him back from El Salvador without looking weak or like they were complying with the Supreme Court decision. He said no, and he resigned. And now we have Erik Siebert, who I'm sure if he wasn't fired would have quit. And we honor him with this hot take, for sure. The Eastern District of Virginia, much like the Southern District of New York, was one of the top, most prestigious outposts for U.S. attorneys. If you got a job there, your career was set. If you wanted to stay in public service, you'd be a prosecutor in one of the finest offices in America, right outside of Washington, D.C., handling a lot of the D.C. cases. If you didn't want that and you spent a few years there, you went off into private practice and made tens of millions of dollars if you're successful with this on your resume. I think Erik Siebert's got an amazing resume now. Stood up to the Trump administration, tried to defend democracy and our rule of law, and was fired for it. Many law firms would hire him and should hire him. He should be on a new job by tomorrow. And we'll continue to follow his career. What's going to happen next? They'll get some sort of lackey, some sort of MAGA lawyer that they'll handpick, puppet. And and the meat puppet that person will be, they'll suddenly find fraud to indict. And that will give rise to a vindictive prosecution defense by Leticia James. Here's how the steps of the conspiracy worked, just so you, as I end this hot take. Trump has a enemies list. It's ever growing. He gives the enemies list to Bill Pulte. Bill Pulte then does some half-baked, half-assed, too smart by half research and finds all sorts of documents without looking and doing full research about people's mortgages. He then, without any vetting, he's not a lawyer. He's barely a general contractor. He was just the son of a construction company. That's it. He starts posting these on social media with mean social media tweets. Donald Trump, right on cue because it's orchestrated, then takes it and he sends his own social media tweets about this particular issue. Then a letter goes from Bill Pulte to a patiently waiting Pam Bondi, because she's in on it. Then Pam Bondi assigns special attorneys like Ed Martin, who's so MAGA and so corrupt that he couldn't even get confirmed as a U.S. attorney in D.C. That's why we have Judge Jeanine there. But he's the special attorney in charge of the weaponization of the Department of Justice. I think it's the anti-weaponization, but in his hands, it's the weaponization of the Department of Justice. He then opens up a file, an investigation about mortgage fraud. So they get the headlines of these people being put under the microscope and throw shade on them to try to destroy the Democratic brand. Then if they can get a U.S. attorney who's already MAGA, a MAGA meat puppet, like John Sarconi up in the Northern District of New York, he opens a file. We're opening a file against the Attorney General's Office of New York because she was successful in bringing, Leticia James was successful, that's what this is all about, in bringing a $450 million fraud case, proved that Donald Trump and his sons committed fraud for the last 10 years, along with other people in the Trump organization. And even though the amount of the fraud is up for dispute, the fraud happened. It was affirmed recently by an appellate court, as was the need for a monitor, a court-appointed officer, in this case, Barbara Jones, a former federal judge who's responsible for keeping an eye on all the money flow in the transactions at the Trump organization, even today while I do this hot take. That's why he's after Leticia James. So he sics Sarconi after him, who couldn't even get confirmed as a U.S. attorney himself, who's illegally serving as U.S. attorney, just like Alina Habba is trying to do in New Jersey. And when they can't get a stand-up guy like Erik Siebert in Virginia to do it, they fire him. We'll continue to follow it right here. I'm fired up. We'll continue to follow it right here on the MeidasTouch Network and on Legal AF. Slide over to Legal AF, the YouTube channel, hit the free subscribe button, and then come over to our Substack. We got an amazing community there. Get together a couple of times a day on lives, have other contributors join us on Legal AF Substack. Until my next report, I'm Michael Popok. Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.